This episode is brought to you by BeWaterSmart.info. It may be fall, but it's still important to be water smart. Make sure your irrigation is off or adjusted for cooler, wetter weather. And did you know fall is a great time to plant your water-wise and drought-tolerant California natives? Planting now gets them established before the heat of the summer arrives. For a list of plants and more water-saving tips and tricks, visit BeWaterSmart.info.
Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour. I'm your host, Marlene. And no Bruce on this one. He is off at the Philadelphia Flower Show. And so with me is a friend, volunteer, Derek Carwood. He is a horticulturalist and something I'm jealous about. He is a plant explorer. And we'll talk more about what that means exactly. But today we're going to talk about Amorphophallus. So some of you may know it as the most popular species, the Titan Arum, the corpse plant, but there's so much more than just that. And Derek is an expert in them. And we're going to hear all about how he has seen them in the wild, how he cultivates them, and how he's helping our collection at the conservatory. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I remember, wasn't that long ago that you contacted me and you're like, hey, I'm, my specialty is cycads and Amorphophallus. And I'm like, oh, we got to get this guy at the conservatory. Then the stories you've told me about your travels, one, make me jealous, but two, it's pretty amazing. So we'll do another cycad. We'll do a cycad episode down the road, but this one I want to do strictly Amorphophallus.
For sure.
I always joke about how to say the plural of it. I do. I want to do an overview of what exactly that genus is, the family, where they're located, and sort of the morphology before we go into growing techniques and your experience with it. So can you just start like family? What is unique about it?
Yeah. So basically they are an aroid. They're within the larger aroid group. They're typically something that you're going to see the vast majority of the species are, kind of concentrated in Southeast Asia. That's where I've spent all of my time exploring them in the wild. But usually Southeast Asia, down into the Pacific Islands, a little bit down into like Northern Australia, where some species like Amorphophallus have, kind of taken up root. Then you also have them going across into India and then also into Africa as well. So they are an old world a genus of plants. In the New World, we've got a similar a genus, Dracontium, very similar in the sense that they've got the same morphology. They basically, and this is the thing that I really love about them, I've got this thing for plants that have very reduced features, right? They've evolved or adapted away all of their, in quote, unnecessary, parts, and they just have the bare minimum of what they need. So when you look at an Amorphophallus, what you're looking at is a single leaf. Which again, that's really cool. You've got the leaf lamina up above, which is typically broken up into three separate, portions. And then you have the petiole, and the petiole is what most people call the stem, because it looks like a stem, right? Mm-hmm. Especially with the larger species, like everybody knows, or is mostly familiar with Titanum, as you had mentioned earlier. And Titanum's huge. It's this giant leaf, gets upwards 15, 20 feet tall or so. But it's also not the tallest. It is the thickest of the petioles. It is one of the larger of the leaves for sure. But there's also Gigas and Decca silva, which are very similar species. And they also get very tall. They're a much skinnier petiole, but much taller, or can be taller anyhow. But anyway, what's really cool about them, what I think is really cool about them, is they produce this single leaf at a time. And so it might look like a tree. And in fact, they've got petiole patterns that are thought to mimic lichens in the wild. Mm-hmm. So larger species like elephants, for example, won't, or Sumatran rhinos in some cases, won't actually run into them because they think that they're a tree. So they've got this amazing, again, I think so, amazing adaptation to basically they produce this single giant leaf it lasts depending on the species, whether it's one of the more temperate species or subtropical species, or one of the what I refer to as the super tropical species like Titanum. They produce this very large leaf. It lasts for anywhere from a season to a year and a half to 2 years. Then they kind of reabsorb the nutrients from that leaf and senesce the leaf, and then they either will go into a bit of a hibernation, a bit of a dormancy period, or they'll produce a new leaf, or they will produce what everybody is most familiar with these plants, where it's the inflorescence.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the Titanum, it's known as the largest inflorescence in the world. It's often misclassified as a flower. It's actually multiple flowers, right? So an inflorescence is made up of many, many flowers altogether. And what's really amazing about that strategy that they have is, they produce the leaf over and over and over. Each time, each season, each cycle, the leaf gets larger and larger. But at the same time, it is basically pumping a corm or a tuber, depending on who you talk to about whether that should be called a corm or a tuber. They're pumping energy into that underground storage, right? It's like a battery. And then every time they do that, they get bigger and bigger and bigger until the plant says, okay, I'm ready to do my thing. It's not on a 7-year cycle, by the way, although it often is 6 to 7 years. And I know that also from some personal experience, which we can talk about in a little bit. But
the 7-year cycle is their first bloom, right? Is that what you mean? Or is there...
the first bloom. Yeah.
Because
so they're said to bloom. Well, there's also people who say, they bloom every 7 years.
Yeah.
They're not like that. They don't actually go on a set cycle. Like most things in nature, there's often a lot of variation. Some of the first Titanums, for example, were at the New York Botanic Garden, and they had them for many, many years. And they couldn't get them to bloom. They weren't sure what was going on. They weren't sure what was, the factors behind why they weren't blooming. But many more years than 7, right? Even from seed.
Yes.
So, it just kind of depends on the environment that the plant is.
Because we got seed at the conservatory. It was like after I graduated and I left the conservatory as a student, and then before I got hired, that's when they were given a handful of seeds, and it took about, I think, 7 years or so for the first bloom, but then it bloomed every other year. So we do the leaf and then bloom, leaf and then bloom. And then, I'll go into this in a bit when we start talking about growing conditions, but we've had a low bloom period for the last several years. And I have my theories of why that happened, but it was blooming every other year, and then it's like,
for sure.
And we have multiples of them, and we'll talk about how we were able to. But okay, so I just wanted to correct that. It takes an age for them to get enough oomph in that corm for them to then put that flower, because that's a lot of energy.
Correct. Yeah, and every time they do flower, they use up a lot of that energy. And so if they're able to rebloom, every couple of years, every other year, that's great. But it does definitely, use enough of the energy from the corm that you start to have a decrease in the weight, and decrease in the size of the corm. And it does have an effect on the health of the plant as well. So it will, deplete energy enough that, in some cases, especially after they've been pollinated and produce seed and set seed, in some cases, they'll actually peter themselves out, right? They just, they use up all their energy, and the plant might still, it's still alive, right? It's still sitting there. But it basically just kind of stops producing a leaf and it just dies. It's something that under ideal conditions, obviously they don't do it, but getting ideal conditions for such a large plant, in the case of Amorphophallus titanum anyway, it can be really difficult. Now with the small species, that's the other thing. With a lot of the small species, which there's literally hundreds of species, right? So a Titanum gets the most, fanfare because of what it is, because of that large inflorescence and whatnot. And they do reek. I mean, you smelled them before. They do definitely have a very distinctive, rotting carcass, specifically of a mammal. In the case of the Titanum, they definitely have that very distinctive odor. But there's tons and tons of other species that are tiny in comparison. Amorphophallus, for example, which is a really, really tiny little feathery leaf
Yes, so
plant,
cute.
but it's just a couple inches tall. They bloom for me basically year round. They just kind of keep going pretty much all the time. Then you have other species, cognac or konjac, depending on how you want to say it. It's the same thing where they typically under good conditions, they can bloom each corm or each tuber can typically bloom every other year if it's given the right conditions. So it really just kind of depends. They don't all smell like, I should mention, they don't all smell the same. Some of them have a kind of fruity odor to them. Some of them smell like a cleaning supply. Like I mentioned before with the Titanum, it specifically smells like the flesh of a rotting mammal.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody, not to get too macabre here, but for anybody who's familiar with the smell of various dead things,
Mm-hmm.
mammals smell different from fish, right? We all know the smell of rotting fish.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's different from what you would smell like with roadkill, right? Which is typically a mammal. That's also different from something like a rotting reptile, right? Reptiles have a very distinctive odor to them. Luckily, I have a very terrible sense of smell, so I do smell the difference, but I also know that it's not as strong as what other people are
Yeah.
smelling in general.
I mean, death is a very distinct smell. Once you've smelled the smell of a mammal dead.
For sure.
And I'm like, most people know it, not from, a human body, hopefully, but more like a rat. And there are many
a
flowers.
Dead mouse, dead rat, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And there, we have the Asclepidaceae, a lot of stapeliads that are pollinated by flies. So it's common for that smell to be in the greenhouse besides the corpse. But, the Titan Arum, that inflorescence, for us, it was anywhere from 3 to 4 feet tall when they bloomed for us, but I know they could get even bigger. And do you want to go into maybe the structure of the flower as well and the timing of the flowers?
For sure. Yeah. And it's really one of the most amazing things about specifically the larger species, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is they've evolved in a place that is super humid, super tropical. There are temperature swings between day and night, but not, like what we know here in California, for example, right? You don't have 100 degrees during the day and then 60 degrees at night. It's typically in the high 80s, pretty much year round. And the reason they produce, the theory anyway, is why they produce such a large inflorescence, is because they have to broadcast that smell to get the odor out there for carrion beetles specifically, to be able to, smell it from somewhere, and, come over looking for, the carrion beetles are duped into thinking, okay, there's a dead mammal here somewhere. They come up into it and inadvertently end up pollinating the plants. But what's really wild about it is that on the first night that the inflorescence opens up, it's usually in the evening or when it starts to cool down. The theory is it helps to broadcast, that scent. They also heat up a little bit, which you can find videos and pictures online of, of infrared of these things, starting to actually, heat up. The spadix, the central, column, starts to heat up.
And you could actually see steam. You could actually see steam coming off. We've had it where you could see
if
steam.
It's cool enough and there's enough of a temperature differential, you can definitely start to see them really warming up.
Yeah.
And again, they need to be able to not only produce that heat for that scent to rise, but they also have the large spathe, the surrounding portion, the skirt, as it will, to be able to help broadcast that up and out, right? And why that's so important is because not only is it a reaction to the hot and humid environment that they live in, but again, they're trying to broadcast to enough beetles that the beetles will come from wherever they are and get to that plant. But it's more than that, which is, again, what's amazing about these is that on the first night, it's the female flowers are receptive, and the second night, the male flowers are receptive. The reason they do that is because they don't want to self-pollinate, right? Mm-hmm. So what you have to do is you have to have a plant that is blooming on the second night, which is the release of pollen, so the male flowers are open. You have to have a second night plant blooming at the same time a first night plant is blooming, for those beetles to go from the second night plant to the first night plant, which is just really wild to wrap your brain around the idea that they have to be blooming, in sync enough, or at least be in the vicinity enough, or at least have, gone from plant to plant rather than actually find, some carrion around the area. Right. Because if they go from, taking pollen from one plant to, finding something dead along the way, then that pollen's lost.
Yeah, if
So
you think about
it's
how
really amazing.
Yeah, if you think about how big these flowers are and how, I wouldn't say. I mean, now it's difficult. I mean, they were once we got them blooming, they would bloom pretty readily. But yeah, just out in the wild, coming across 2 Titan Arums in bloom would be amazing. And that's what
amazing, yeah.
and it worked.
It's
I mean,
absolutely
obviously it happens because the plant still, it does work. But yeah,
it's really amazing. And again, that's the idea behind it. That's one of the leading theories anyway, as to why they're so large, is because they have to be huge, right? And because of the consequence of needing to be a huge inflorescence, they also have that huge leaf to be able to, gather enough energy, especially in the forest. They're typically, by the way, they're not usually in a deep forest. They're usually along like the sides of the forest or like a side of a clearing. So they're kind of in that transition area where they get a little bit of sun, but not full sun. Many of the species, not all of them, of course. I've seen many in the wild where they're on like a north slope underneath a very, very thick, broadleaf canopy. So, it really just depends on the species and what they're capable of. But it's pretty amazing for sure.
Yeah. And so they all have that same flower morphology, is where they have the spadix, male, female flowers, different pollinators based on the fragrance, like you were mentioning. Some have more of a rotting fruit smell, and you even said chemical smell, but it's still something that's being attractive to lay their, I guess the goal is to lay their larvae on it. That's why they
actually not even to lay the larva. They just need to be there long enough to get some of the pollen on them.
No, but I mean, that's why they're attracted there.
Another plant.
That's why the carrion beetles are attracted there. Is it the beetles?
Yeah.
So I know with the flies, they lay their larvae usually on it. So it's a food source, they think, for their larvae. But I don't know, the beetles, do they actually eat the carcass, or is it they are also laying their eggs on it? I don't know.
If they actually find a carcass, yes.
Okay.
But with the inflorescences, I've never heard of the beetles actually like laying eggs on the inflorescence.
Okay. I wasn't
but
sure
on the
about
carrion
the
for sure.
Yeah. So the large Titan Arum is from Sumatra and Indonesia primarily.
Yes. Yeah. They are from Sumatra, specifically the kind of the western side of Sumatra more than the east side. In the wild, they're endangered. They may even be critically endangered at this point. I always tell people, if you've not been to a tropical rainforest, go now. I was traveling through a place in northern Vietnam in 2017, and I went back in 2023 to that same location. It was an 8-hour stretch, and in 2017 it was all forested. And again, this is broadleaf, evergreen, like kind of subtropical. But the entire time it was, for the 8 hours stretch, it was, forest. I went back in 2023 and it was all gone. It had all been, cut down, burned. And then they were planting bananas and taro, a lot of cinnamon, so a lot of their economy, and specifically in Vietnam, is growing. And so they're trying to do a lot more crops and a lot more agriculture. But unfortunately, the tropical rainforest, or the subtropical rainforest in this case, end up losing out. Right. The same thing's happening in Sumatra.
Yeah. Was there a species of Amorphophallus in Vietnam that you saw? Is that?
Oh yeah. We've seen many. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few species in Vietnam. The Tonkinensis is one of my favorites from Vietnam. It's some of them have kind of a bluish petiole pattern, which I think is just amazing. Absolutely stunning. They've got and that's one of the attractants to a lot of people. The people who are starting to there's a huge Facebook group, by the way, if for anybody who wants to go to it. Where people kind of get together. They talk about the different growing techniques. They talk about species that they're collecting or that they're looking for. And a lot of the attraction is the petiole pattern, right? Many of the species look very similar, not only in their inflorescence and flower, but they look very similar, other than the pattern of the petiole.
I wonder
which is very variable as well.
Wonder what a blue petiole. I mean, usually when you have blue on an understory, it's light acquisition. Or do you think it's something that an animal would, like you're talking about how the petioles have like almost like the lichen on it. So animals will think
Yeah,
it's a,
with Tonkinensis, it's not a huge species.
Mhm.
You're looking at like 3-4 feet max.
Okay.
As far as the ones that I've grown, it's kind of they're like zebra striped, and it's toward the base. So I don't know if it's just the way that it looks to our eyes, or
Yeah.
maybe it's something unrelated.
Yeah.
I will say, however, that yeah, I think I've shown you pictures in person of some of the begonia species that we found, specifically in Laos, that are really blue, like
Mhm.
very, very blue. And so there is definitely something to do with the capture of light and deeper, darker areas of the forest. That seems to be the case anyway. But in this case, I don't know if it's just something that just happens to look kind of bluish, or if it's just because I also have other clones of Tonkinensis that aren't blue at all.
Oh.
They have kind of more of a typical striped green and light green pattern to them.
So,
So
yeah. So in Vietnam, that area that you saw, I imagine there were the Amorphophallus that were just gone. It was in that 8-hour
oh yes,
stretch. Okay.
oh for sure, yeah, yeah. And the other thing is the mountains in the area that the Amorphophallus do really well on is all karst, right? It's all limestone. Those are the very pointy, jagged rocks. If you get on the top of them and you kind of walk around the tops, they're like razor blades, right?
Ooh.
I even had one cut through a shoe that I was
Jeez.
wearing at the time, and so you have to be very, very careful with them. But they're the big giant Avatar, mountains, right? Avatar was
Got
actually
it. Okay.
based off of a place in Southeast China. And so they have that very distinctive look. The karst mountains are very porous, and so they produce these pockets, and these pockets produce or they capture a lot of leaf litter, which eventually starts to degrade and decompose into soil, and that's where you find a lot of these species of Amorphophallus. They're specifically in these pockets of karst in these mountains and hills and whatnot. The downside of that is that these mountains are being harvested for production of concrete. And so, in Laos specifically, I was there in 2018, and we were looking for various species in Laos. And you hear 24/7, night and day. I was there for 20 days, and the entire time you're hearing bombs going off. And what they're doing is it's companies that are literally blowing up these karst mountains to haul away and produce concrete. So there's many places where where there were Amorphophallus, and now are no longer Amorphophallus, along with all the other species that come along with them.
Was there
So-
any mitigation? I mean, anyone go in there and, I know this is, I mean, we're
Mhm.
going to touch upon quote poaching, but it's not poaching when you're saving.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a big topic, right? It's
Yeah.
something that if you talk to the individuals, and if you talk to individual explorers or horticulturists and you say, well, what's better, having these plants blown up and destroyed, or, at least, sampled for scientific research or for propagation. Individually, it's often the case that people are like, well, of course you should sample them, you should get them, whatever. In groups, you often hear the opposite. In groups, you often hear people say, well, absolutely not. You shouldn't touch them. They belong to the people of the area, which I don't disagree with, of course. But there's a lot of differing opinions on that. And I will say, I want to kind of bring it out into light. I will say that oftentimes it is one-on-one. You hear a very different story from people, whether they work at a botanical garden or otherwise, give you a different story as to what they feel should happen in some of these cases. We have all these like CITES protections and whatnot, which I think are really well intended. The idea is to make sure that people aren't poaching, because of course poaching is not a good thing, right? But in the process, in many cases, they've either made it too bureaucratic or too difficult to actually go out and explore and again sample plants, not take all of the plants, but sample like one or two of a species, so that it can be propagated and grown and studied, described in many cases for Western science. In many cases, by the way, I mean, it just as the rest of the world, right? The people who are from the area, indigenous to the area, they know about these plants, right? They've seen them their entire lives. They've gone back for generations. They know about them. They have their own names for them in many cases. or at least group them together as like, well, that's an Amorphophallus, but they've got its own name, right?
Yeah.
So it's not species by species.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, but with the destruction of some of these areas, it's really sad to see because, if people aren't able to get in there and describe species and propagate some of these species before they're gone, right?
Yeah.
So it's a highly debatable topic. It's something that, again, most people are very well have good intentions for producing some of these and creating some of these laws and bureaucracies about how to get these plants studied and described and whatnot. But unfortunately, it also really makes it difficult for people to do actual scientific research and to figure some of those things out.
And sadly, sometimes we don't even know. Like you didn't. I mean, unless you know this area is going to be destroyed, you wouldn't go in and go, "Oh,
for sure,
I should save
100%,
something now."
There are, again, back to begonias. If you're out on those karst hills, it might be a hill that is like 40, 50, 100 feet tall, right? It's not ginormous, but it's kind of out in the middle of a rice paddy. It's surrounded by water on all sides. If you go on the north side, you've got one species of begonia. You go on the south side, you've got another species. East side, west side, you have two other species, right? Mm-hmm. And they may be found only in that location. Amorphophallus picellus is a perfect example. We went back, this was a site in Laos. We went back to a location that was a known site for the species, the only known site for the species. I hadn't been there previously, but I had been told about it. So we go back and the entire place had been leveled. The intent behind the owner was to produce some sort of, build some sort of production plant or, commercial plant or whatever the case might have been. And it was all gone. It had been completely decimated. Unfortunately, we were able to at least photograph some kind of remnant population that was back behind some bamboo on the site, so that we were able to say, okay, well, at least at that point in time in 2023, or not in 2023, it's 2018, that the species is alive in the wild at that location.
Okay.
And it may be the case that in that particular case that it exists in other areas, but we don't know, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't found them in those other areas. And they've been, in many cases, either been extensively logged and destroyed, or extensively, explored and looking for those species and can't find them. So,
and I'm not gonna cast shame over people who have land and are trying to make a living, or
sure,
I mean, it's God knows that's been done in all developed countries. But so that's not what's in discussion. But yeah, I think I would have to go in and just be like, hey, I know this is going to be destroyed. I'm taking this. I don't consider this poaching at all.
For sure. And there's other people that all the collections that I've done have been legal collections with all the proper permits and the okay from people on site. In that Picellus site, by the way, the owner just happened to be there and he told us, no, I don't want you collecting anything. And we said, okay. So we took some pictures and we left.
Interesting. Okay.
So that is the case sometimes. And you have to be respectful, that in our own history here in the United States, we've got, our prairies, right? If somebody had told us don't destroy your prairies, back in the founding of the country, basically, right? And expansion from east to the west. We had millions of acres of prairies and now we've got barely anything. And that was all in the name of, in quote, progress.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So who are we to go to them and say, well, you can't do this?
No, exactly. That's
So
that's,
you've got that kind of moral dilemma there. But, I would like to think that most people are, they're like, hey, if, and in most cases where we've gone out and done collections, we talk to the property owners and we say, hey, is this something that we could do? And they're like, yeah, here. Okay. Actually, I know of a site you can collect them right there.
Yeah.
That's happened in many, many cases. In vast majority of cases, of course. So you do have one or two people who will say, no, this is my property. I don't want you to take anything. And then you have other people who are like, sure, whatever. And in many cases, they sit and invite you to tea. That's happened many times.
Yeah,
so
great.
It's kind of, it's great because it allows, especially with technology, the ability to, translate, the voice text and whatnot is just amazing. You can sit there and have a conversation with people without speaking the same language.
That's crazy.
So, it's pretty amazing.
So Vietnam, Laos, how many species would you say you saw personally there?
Well, in each location, probably, I don't know, 10 to 15,
Wow.
max.
Okay.
There's a lot more
Still.
out there that that are described. They're just not, we're in the places that we were looking. You have certain species like Peonifolius that is, I've actually had trouble growing Peonifolius, the true Peonifolius, in cultivation. I almost always lose the plant.
Why do you say true?
I don't know, to be honest with you. The most of my plants, I've got 8-year-old twins, and my life is, roughly wrapped around
you
their
said
schedules
you
and
said
whatnot.
true Peonifolius. Is there a false
Oh yeah, yeah.
one?
No, well, so there's a couple of species out there that I've noticed that are being grown as
Okay.
Peonifolius, but they're not actually Peonifolius.
Got it.
Peonifolius it's very distinctive because it's got a rough petiole, although
Yes.
there is supposedly a smooth petiole form. I was growing the smooth petiole form for a while. I just never had it bloom, so I couldn't see for myself that it is the exact same thing because you have to wait for the inflorescence. But I've also noticed there's a couple other species out there that people are growing as Peonifolius, but I don't know that they're actually Peonifolius.
I'll have to pull a picture out because it's. I think it's my favorite flower, and we've had it bloom at the conservatory multiple times.
For sure,
it's been a bit.
They're
but
very cool. It looks like a brain.
It's this short,
ground.
squat thing. I mean, whereas the Konjac and Titan Arum, they have that really elongated spadix. The spadix on this is it's like a head, and then looks almost like cabbage, and then you have the petal around it. It's one of my favorite. It's because it's a very distinct one, and that is where is that native to? You said Australia.
So it's in Australia now, but it's more thought to be just kind of a weed, right? And that's why I mentioned it's hard for me to grow it, but it's actually a weed in the wild.
Crazy.
It can get really, really huge. There's one that's called giant form, that was collected, I want to say, in Thailand by Alan Galloway, and the giant form is actually, in my mind, it's just the same as the straight species. It was just collected in an area where it was just a huge plant. They get huge. I mean, they definitely get very, very large. Elephant yam is one of the very common names for Peonifolius, by the way. They're grown heavily in South Asia and Southeast Asia, but it grows as kind of a weed. The other species that's very similar, definitely rarer, but very similar to Peonifolius in flower, is the Bangkokensis, which is actually a species that was found, I believe, at a waste dump in Bangkok. And so, I want to say that one was found by Alan Galloway as well, but don't quote me on that. It has a smaller flower that's similar looking, not quite as extensive. But I want to say that one's kind of probably floating around out there as well. People are thinking it's Peonifolius, but it's actually Bangkokensis. So there's some of those sorts of things that are going on where people think they have one, but they've got another. And with a lot of the species that are more from the subtropical northern Vietnam, northern Laos region, the inflorescences look so similar that's really, really hard to tell. The petioles look very similar. The leaf lamina look very similar. So they're very similar looking species.
Okay, it's then you have to wait for these things to flower, which could be a while before you figure out exactly what.
Exactly. Yeah, I've got plants that I've had for years, and I've never been able to get to bloom.
Yeah.
And then I've other species that they bloom all the time,
like the Konjac. That's the Konjac is probably the easiest to bloom
for sure,
and it could be weedy outside in our zone 9, so it's pretty.
Well, and what's amazing about that species is that it is super, super hardy. So it's listed as a subtropical, but I would even say it's temperate because it is. I actually found that one growing at a woman's house. It was a little old lady who lived in Sioux City, Iowa, which when she got it, this has been, like 50 years ago now. She's since passed. I was driving by. I was living in Iowa at the time. I drove by, and out of the corner of my eye, I was like, that looks familiar. And I turned and I looked, and here's this plant growing up, so I turn around, I go back to her house, I knock on the door and I say, hi, I noticed you've got this plant growing outside. I knew it was, Konjac because I could tell by their very distinctive petiole and leaf and whatnot. And she's like, oh yeah, I called a Florida palm. A friend of mine from Florida gave it to me, and I just planted it there about 40 years ago. Again, this was like 10 to 15 years ago now. And it's just been growing there every year. Sometimes it smells really bad, so I just cut that leaf off. She thought it was a
Oh
part of the leaf.
God.
And she didn't like it. So she was like, I just cut that off, and it just grows and does its thing. Well, when she did that, that area was still listed as 4B. So
Oh
it
my
wasn't even a
gosh.
zone 5 yet at the time when she planted it. So cognac is super, super hardy under the right conditions. And now this was on the south side of her house, and it was under an eave, and she did have mulch, along the surface. So it had some protection. But Sioux City, Iowa is cold.
Yeah.
You get down into, negative below zero easily over the winter.
That's crazy.
And it was able to survive, and bloom at that.
And
So they're very, very hardy.
in that one, so not all of them, like that one will set new corms. And a lot of
Yes.
them will multiply corms, but the Titan Arum and Amorphophallus, those are two. I know the Titan Arum definitely does not, right?
Yeah, so it will split in half,
Yeah,
or
we've
split
had
into
one.
pieces.
I think we've
they
had one
tend to do that.
Mhm.
So for the Titanum, it really depends on the species. A lot of the species also produce under right conditions, or even just under normal conditions, will produce leaf bulbils, and so
Yeah.
there'll be this little like wart basically that grows up at the the apex of the leaf, and it just grows, and then the adaptive strategy there is actually really cool. Because what it does is, again, most of these grow on hillsides or on, karst, formations and whatnot. And so once the leaf begins to senesce, at that point, the bulbil is basically fully matured. And as the leaf falls over, the bulbil rolls away.
That's
And
crazy.
it basically sets root wherever it is, and produces another, clone of the mother plant.
That's crazy.
So while they don't produce,
Mhm.
offsets underground, and they don't split necessarily, although they can in many cases, they're able to do that, which is just very, very cool. The other thing, and we've actually had this happen, just, along on our travels, you cut a leaf and you put it in a plastic bag. And sometimes, especially under the hot, humid conditions of, Southeast Asia, they actually start to produce roots from the leaf.
Mhm.
A lot of people have started to, explore leaf propagation with Amorphophallus, and you can, for many species, not all of them, but many species, you can actually cut off the leaf, and just place it in a cup of water, and it'll reroot and produce a new corm.
And that's how
So-
we have so many of the Titan Arums. We
Yeah,
got X number of
You can propagate it
seeds.
that way.
Yeah, so we have different genetic clones, but we also have the same genetic clones because we took a portion, just like a
Mhm.
portion of the leaf, and we would start it in perlite, and then so we had so many that a lot of the institutions around us have ones that are clones because
For
we
sure.
got pretty
Yeah.
good at it. So like the Titan Arum, that one you don't or can't get pollinated because you don't have two in bloom and you don't want it
Mhm.
to die. And doesn't really set those offsets readily.
Correct. Yeah.
It's crazy
The
that's what you could do.
the only issue with that in the long run is a genetic bottleneck happening, right?
Yep.
And we don't want to have all of our plants to be clones, because
Mhm.
then we end up with everything's the same.
Yep.
And then even if we were to reintroduce into the wild, at some point, should it be necessary or interested, people interested in doing that, which in some cases that has happened, specifically in Sumatra. You end up with a bottleneck population that's genetically, very, very similar to each other, if not exactly the same.
So will they not, so you have, even if you have two different, will they not pollinate each other if they're genetic clones?
They will.
They will.
They will.
Okay. But
I've never heard of them having issues.
Okay.
As far as as long as it's two plants.
Yeah.
That's I've never heard otherwise.
Okay.
I have pollinated when I was working at the Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden in Des Moines, Iowa. I pollinated the plant that we had there and produced, I want to say it was like 98, 99 seeds or whatever,
Mhm.
or fruits. And every single one of them, germinated, and I distributed them all over the place. But I used pollen from, there was a woman down in Missouri who had previously worked at Missouri Botanical Garden, and she had her own plant that just happened to be blooming a couple of weeks before the plant that bloomed in Iowa.
Okay.
And so when that happened, I asked her, could you just send me some of your pollen? So she overnighted some pollen to me in these little, test tubes. And then when ours bloomed, I cut a hole in the side, pollinated half, half
Mhm.
of the, of all of the female, flowers as they were ripening. because I didn't want to, burn out the plant
Yeah.
basically. And that's we had a successful, fruiting, and
Got
seeding.
it. Yeah.
So as long as, and I know that they were genetically distinct plants, I will say that.
Okay.
Hers was, a darker petiole. It looked very different, or not petiole, rather, spathe. And it was also left and right. There's left-handed versions and right-handed versions. So you've got that as well, where the overlaps on the left or the right.
Oh, interesting. I haven't noticed that.
Yeah, so they are left-handed and right-handed.
Oh.
And I don't know if that's a genetic thing. I just don't know. I don't know enough about some of those genetics behind some of these guys, but yeah. So
What's the so a lot of them will produce little corm, so that's that, but they're still genetic clones. So and I have in my mind the little feathery one. Is that the smallest species? The I can't pronounce.
I want to say Pokelus is the smallest. But the Onxicolii is the little feathery one. And I mean, both of them are very, very small. And I guess it would depend on whether you're referring to the leaf being smallest, or the inflorescence being the smallest, because the Onxicolii, I mean, the inflorescence is tiny, really, really small. Same with Pokelus. I mean, it's the same. They have a very similar looking inflorescence. There's also, what is it? Malcolmus Thysanii, that it's also another small species, although that one may be a hybrid. I don't know where they are with the genetics on that one yet. And so there's a number of very, very tiny species that are out there. And a lot of people are actually gravitating toward the smaller species now, because they are easy to grow. You can grow them indoors year round. There's some species, what is it, Mirabilis, I want to say, that has like a colorful petiole. They're really difficult to grow. There is, what was it? Barbatus, I want to say.
Okay.
And that is kind of has a dark petiole leaf. Barbatus. That is one that we did find that one was in Laos, I want to say. That one has a nice dark leaf and a very cool looking inflorescence to it as well. So there's a lot of different leaf and color variations on the smaller plants that people really kind of they kind of gravitate toward, as far as the individuals looking to collect, right?
Yeah. Now the one that I think is most distinct and one of the prettiest leaves is the Atroviridis. And I pronounce it right?
Yeah, for sure, Atroviridis. Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful one. Yeah,
because it's got the dark with then the edges that are pink. So anything that's got pink.
Correct.
Where's that
and
one
there's
native
a lot of spotted ones as well.
Okay.
I should also mention that there's a bunch of hybrids out there now. I've mentioned Alan Galloway. He's since passed, but he was a friend of mine who I traveled to multiple times to Southeast Asia, he's kind of the king of Amorphophallus, if you were. He's started out as an IT guy and ended up being the king of Amorphophallus. Described a bunch of species. Had a massive collection that after he passed, largely was donated to various institutions, Plant Delights being one of them, or a Juniper Level Botanic Garden. So they have a bunch of his plants, which, by the way, if you go to Plant Delights, they often have a lot of species and hybrids that are available on their website, and they're relatively cheap, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So a lot of those hybrids are hybrids that Alan produced himself.
Okay.
There's another guy named Steve Jackson who lives in Northern Australia. Great guy. He has tons of hybrids that he's produced. In fact, I have one of his that is a complex hybrid between Variabilis and Deca Silva. And so it's a F2 generation of, I don't remember which way it was, but Deca Silva times Variabilis times Deca Silva times Variabilis. So it's this, highly complex. It's got a gorgeous, petiole on it. Very, very cool, kind of alien looking petiole.
Cool.
And so there's lots of different hybrids. Steve Jackson is specifically working with a lot of the larger species, like the Hewittii and Deca Silva, Gigas, Titanum, some of the really big ones.
Let's talk a little. Speaking of, let's talk a little bit about how you grow them and how people should grow them. And I'll talk a little bit about how we grow them at the conservatory. So based on size, already that might be a limiting factor for some people to grow some of them. Cold tolerance, because not all of them could just grow outside. Not many of them.
For sure.
They're from humid areas. So talk a little bit about how you grow yours and what you would recommend to people at home.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, most of the species are tropical. They love humidity. So I always had really good luck with them in the Midwest, specifically in Iowa. Iowa, the summers are basically tropical, right? You get so much humidity and it's so hot, day and night, that you've basically replicated the tropics. They love that. Here in California is a little more difficult if you have them outdoors, not in a greenhouse, because it's so dry that, especially as the leaves start to come out and they begin to foliate in the spring, or the early summer in some cases, you often get a lot of like tears and whatnot in the leaves because it's just so dry, right? They don't do it very well. I will say with Amorphophallus, it is a hugely diverse group of plants, hugely diverse. And I hate the old adage, but there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? It's terrible.
It is awful. As a cat rescuer, that's awful.
Yeah,
but
it sounds terrible, but it's I don't even know where that comes from.
Yeah.
To be honest. It's kind of gross.
Sicko is where it comes
most
from.
people know it.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's the same with the Amorphophallus. There's more than one way to grow them. I have kind of my specific way that I do it. I've got kids. I'm kind of busy, and so mine, I leave them in the pots over the winter, and then I repot in the spring before they start to come out of dormancy.
So they do have a set. So even though they're tropical, they do definitely have a spring growth. I noticed that.
Yes and no. Okay. So I refer to them either as subtropical, tropical, or again super tropical, which isn't necessarily a technical term. But the super tropical species are like Titanum and the larger species specifically, where they don't really have a cycle that is based on the seasons. It's just they just are always going, right? That being said, I know a lot of people who grow them in like southern Florida, for example, where they are very seasonal because you have a little bit of a season in southern Florida.
Okay.
Even though it is subtropical, you have enough seasonal variation that the petiole the leaf will begin to die off toward like the fall. Okay. What would be their fall, right?
Yeah.
And then kind of come back the next season. So there is a little bit of that. They are they are pretty flexible in what they can and can't do. They're a little bit hardier than most people give them credit for sure. Again, going back to the cognac being able to survive in zone 4B. So they are very hardy. I think one of the biggest things that people run into with these plants is just having a soil that is moist, but also allows for a lot of aeration, a lot of drainage. They can, in most cases, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking to myself a case that I saw in the wild, but in most cases, they don't like to sit in water, right? So if they're sitting in water, if it's cold or if it's chilly, they typically will rot. Right. So that's kind of where some of the people run into dormancy issues, where they for the species that go dormant on a regular basis, kind of seasonally, if they're stored too cold and too wet, they will easily rot. However, if they're stored warm and, slightly moist in the soil, they tend to do fine. Right. So that's, again, going back to Peonifolius, that's typically what they want, but I can't keep mine alive for the life of me.
Got it.
So, the species that I have, and I've got quite a few, the species that I have, they survive really well in the pot. Some people take them out of the pot at the end of the season and inspect them, put them in baggies with perlite, and then leave them until they start to come out the next season. A lot of people do that.
Wow.
So they're very intensive, I should say. There's a lot of change of soil. You've got a lot of bacterial, fungal issues. They are prone to getting nematodes. And so I always grow, and I don't know if it necessarily helps, but I always grow the Nemagon marigolds with them. Because they're supposed to help with, getting rid of or whatever with nematodes. So I grow those in pretty much all of the pots just as a precaution. And depending on where you are in the United States, that may or may not be an issue. By the way, most of those nematodes are a problem in the warmer areas, Florida, parts of California and whatnot. Not necessarily a problem in the upper Midwest, however. So if you're up there, it doesn't really matter.
So what is your soil?
But so I use whatever is cheapest.
Okay.
So I will go to Home Depot or Lowe's and I will buy the cheapest I can find, whether it's Miracle Grow or whatever else from the area. And that's what I use.
So it's pretty peat though.
What's that?
Do you add anything to it? Because that's a lot of
times. So
Mhm.
I often will add perlite or sand to make sure that it is, again, draining really well. You don't want something that is, again, heavy. If you have a soil and you can typically tell from the bag itself, right? If you pick up a bag that has been, in many cases where they're stored outside, they start to collect water. If the bag is just like has a rancid smell coming from it, because that happens, right? It doesn't mean the soil is bad necessarily. It just means it's been sitting there for a long time and it's it's got anaerobic bacteria going on. But I try to avoid soils that are overly they hold too much moisture, because again that can be a problem in my experience, right? Again, I should go back to, I've seen Amorphophallus growing in pockets on karst mountains that are literally filled with water, and the entire corm is underwater, and the plant's doing really, really
There's
well.
always exceptions.
So, so it kind of blows that out of the water, right? Yeah. So you say, oh, make sure that they don't have too much water. But again, I have pictures on my phone of plants that are growing completely submerged underwater. So, it happens. And for me, it just amounts to trying to make sure that I water them and keep them, moist enough, keep the humidity high enough, but then also make sure that they've got enough drainage that you don't start to have any kind of rot start to happen.
So humidity, do you use a humidifier or do you grow them in a grow tent that all the plant material and water makes their own humidity? How do you control that?
Well, at grow tents here in California, again, this is my first year back in California after 15 years in the Midwest. And I will say that what was really amazing growing them in the Midwest is I just put them outside.
Yeah.
And so everything went outside and they flourished, all summer long, especially in Iowa. The summer was long enough in Iowa, just long enough in Iowa that, they would have the entire season to grow and do really, really well. And then they would start to die back right about the same time that a typical year they would, start to senesce and whatnot with the season. So that worked out really well. Here in California, I've got them all in a grow tent right now. They are mostly dormant, although I do have, again, the Steve Jackson hybrid that I was referring to earlier. That one grows kind of year round anyway. So it's doing its thing. Okay. They are all starting to pop up at this point. And so I do need to start potting them up, getting them ready to go for the season. And I'll probably keep them in the grow tent because it's more humid until the leaf has fully come out. Okay. And then I'll take them outside and keep them in, a mostly shady area, area on the side of the house. Okay. That gets, morning and afternoon sun, like late afternoon sun.
Okay. And do you, moving them outside, I imagine one, space, but two, also light, because do you give them supplemental light as they're emerging?
Yeah, in the grow tent they do.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have LED lights.
Okay.
That they're under. They do start to edulate a little bit, even though they're under lights. You still have that happen. And I think it's just the quality of the LEDs, frankly. Okay. But once they're outside, they do really well, and they kind of flourish. They just do their thing. Okay. I should mention I feed the heck out of them.
I was going to say I wanted to talk about your bloom booster.
Yes. Yeah. So. I don't think the bloom boost, I don't use it to increase the amount of inflorescences that I'm getting, right? I do it because the theory is that they're higher in phosphorus. And so that you're going to have, larger, corms at the end of the year.
Got it.
They're going to be absorbing as much of that as possible.
Okay.
I don't really care for the inflorescences, to be honest. I think most of them are kind of boring. Again, my interest in the genus is the fact that they're all single leaf, and I think that's just kind of cool. But if they bloom, I'm kind of like, whatever. In fact, what's funny is every year I've got them blooming on me. It's one plant or another is going to be blooming, and every year I step into the grow tent or I'll be in a greenhouse or what have you. And I'll be like, there's a dead rat in here. There's a dead mouse in here. Every single year.
That's so funny.
I've been growing them for over 20 years.
I'm still like that though with the stapelias. I'm like, oh God, there's a dead rat. Sometimes there is a dead rat. Sometimes it is a dead rat.
Sometimes it is something dead.
Yeah. That's
funny.
But
almost every time they trick me. And again, I don't have a very sensitive nose. So I'm not the best person for that. But they still, they still confuse me. So if you think about it, you're a tiny little beetle that's looking for food. They're very confused. When they get to an inflorescence and they're not finding rotting flesh, they're very confused.
Yeah. The bulbifera though to me smells more like rotting fruit. Is it?
Yeah.
That one.
The bulbifer.
Bulbifer. There you go.
Yeah.
That one doesn't have
bulbifer, it has its own kind of, again, like a fruity scent.
Yeah.
Some of them are more citrusy.
Yeah.
Again, some of them are like cleaning, supplies.
Yeah.
I, again, don't take my word for it necessarily because I got a bad nose, but, they all have very distinct, odors to them. Mostly similar, like most of them have while it might sound like cleaning solution, it's cleaning solution that is like mixed with something rancid.
There
right?
you go. Oh, lovely. Yeah. You're cleaning up the dead body with bleach. There you go. You're cleaning up the crime scene with
the fact, right?
Yeah.
No, they definitely, it's not a pleasant smell,
No.
And with the species like Titanum, if you're around the inflorescence while they're blooming, it's like an oily scent. So it's like in your nose for the rest of the day.
And
it definitely sticks with you. I always, wash my clothes at the end of the day because it always just, it seems that, and I don't know if it's necessarily on my clothes or if it's in my nose, but in any case, it smells, and it takes some time to kind of get rid of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I went and saw, I think it was Sacramento States, and they kept theirs in this glass chamber. Oh boy.
Oh yeah.
That really upped the I want to talk a little bit about how we grow them at the conservatory and some of our experiences. So as far as the soil goes, we always grew them in our quote standard soil, which to most people, it's a succulent mix. It has a lot of pumice in it. And as I was mentioning that we had regular blooms, we had Ted the Titan, we had Tabitha, we had Tammy, and we would get blooms on them almost, with 3 active ones, blooms a lot. And then all of a sudden it came to a screeching halt. And I remember just waking up and going, what is different? We got really brand new LED lights, which if anything made it better because we were using metal halide. Nothing else changed, or fertilizer regime changed. And I went, oh, that's right. At the time, my coworker did not like the fact the pumice was puckering the corm as the corm. And so we moved everything into our carnivorous plant mix, which was just peat moss and perlite. And my theory behind that is possibly, they weren't rotting out. Maybe a few did, but my theory is, peat holds so much water that we didn't need to fertilize as much. So possibly it wasn't getting as much fertilizer. So slowly over the past couple of years, we've been moving them back into our standard soil, which is pumice, little red lava, coconut core, decomposed granite. And we'll see. Our last bloom was during COVID, and it was a smaller bloom. It was about, these are the Titan Arums. It was about maybe 2.5 feet tall, which was much smaller. So that's one thing. And I know you mentioned we'll give it some supplemental fertilizer even. I have yet to do that, mainly because I keep forgetting. We have one. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna, as far as the supplemental, again, that's why I use I specifically use the Jax Classic, the Bloom Boost or whatever it's called. That's what I use. And as far as the soil and like a concern about puckering, for example, if when you see them in the wild, they are oftentimes, again, they're in like a crevice in the rock, in the karst, and you can't get them out. Right? It's not easy in some cases to be able to just like pull them out, especially by the petiole, because they are so like jammed in there, and they've grown into the crevice. And so the shape of the petiole is all disfigured because it's grown into the pockets, and it's more than puckered. It's just completely like deformed by whatever it's growing in. And I wouldn't be concerned about that for anybody listening, by the way, as far as a given corm looking weird or looking like it has a weird shape or whatnot, because most of these species, they reabsorb the corm as they grow the leaf, and they produce a new one in the next season. That's part of, they've got these contractile roots that pull them down deeper. And so as the corm gets larger, it basically drops itself lower into the crevice that was where the previous season's corm was, right? So it kind of, they drop themselves lower. They produce a larger, corm the next season, hopefully. And they continue to do their thing. So oftentimes you take them out of the soil or take them out of a pot or whatever, and they look completely deformed. They look goofy.
Yeah.
But it's a very, transient thing anyway.
Yeah. A few other interesting things that happen is, we've had the leaf get to the top of hit the greenhouse, which is about, I think, 15, 18 feet tall. Sometimes when they just emerge and it's really bright, they unfortunately cook up there. So the leaf doesn't last as long, and therefore the corm's not getting all that energy and photosynthase. So that's a problem. Another one, Ted, when we weighed it after it bloomed 1 year, it was 40 pounds. And because they're short and squat, you need a wide pot. But generally a wider pot is a deeper pot. And we put it on a plastic inverted pot so it wouldn't do what you said, which is fall down, but it broke the pot, fell between the pot and wedged itself in there. And then when we weighed it again, it had lost weight. So these are just some stupid mistakes that we made. Now we have one in a different greenhouse in a huge pot. Like, I want to say it might be 4.5 feet wide. And that one was doing the splitting because there's a second smaller leaf coming up. Now that one, if we're going to get a bloom anytime soon, that I think from that one. Because it was in leaf for over 1.5 years. It was an incredibly tall leaf. The leaf was probably about 8 feet tall, which is still, it's okay. But the petiole was enormous, the circumference. So the fact that it was in leaf for over 1.5 years, the petiole was very girthy, and it did a slow leaf sinensis, not like, oh, I got burnt or hot, I'm going to drop down. And it has the big pot, and it had good fertilizer. It's dormant right now. I'm really hoping now that's a little offshoot or it's split corm, that leaf is still like actively growing. Now here's a question. Watering when they're dormant.
Yeah. So one of the ways with the Titanum that people go wrong is they completely take them out of the soil like you would with like a cognac, right? With the cognac, you can take them out. With many of the species, you can take them out of the soil, set them on a countertop, and leave them for the entirety of the winter. No problem, right? However, with a lot of species, you do need to keep them in an area where it at least stays super humid, if not, again, moist year round. With the Titanums, you do need to keep them moist. Otherwise, it will begin to shrivel the tuber. And that can be a problem. That's usually what happens with my Peonifolius, for example. They just end up shriveling up because I'm not keeping them warm and wet enough the entirety of the season.
Got it. Okay.
So it really depends on where they're from and the genus. But I have seen, especially on like the Facebook page, you have all these people that are like, oh, I took it out, it's ready to go for for the season, the dormant season. And I'm like, no, put it back in the soil, let it be. Make sure that it stays, damp. You need to have some moisture around the tuber. Some of those species, again, like Titanum, they don't completely go dormant, right? Like most of the time they'll have roots that are still out doing their thing, collecting moisture, collecting nutrients. And so there's still, it's not really dormancy as it's like a pause, right? Like a pause from the leaf. Whereas other species, they drop their roots, right? All the roots shrivel up and the whole thing dries up. And it really, again, it just depends on where they're from in the wild. Those, again, what I referenced is, the super tropical species like Titanum, they're going to be growing year round. Even if they don't have a leaf, they've got something going on under the soil. Whereas, again, something like a subtropical temperate species like cognac is going to be a very different story. It dries up, and it's just this, brown, potato looking thing for the entirety of the dormant season.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's really important to mention, because I think people think, oh, it's a bulb ish.
For sure.
It goes completely dormant. And we have a sign on ours, do not water, because we have so many different people water that we're airing on the side. So a few of us are watering them because we know to water them. But if we had everyone water them. If they didn't see that, it would be too wet.
It would be,
So,
yeah, exactly. And again, if you want to think about like where are they from in the wild, right?
mhm.
In the wild, most of the titanums are on hillsides. In fact, most species are on hillsides, and that may just be something that it's that's all that is left, right? Like
Yeah.
most of the lowlands have all been cultivated at this point. But in any case, you see these plants growing on hillsides. They're typically in an area where there's plenty of drainage. So even with a titanum, for example, where it's dormant in the wild, it's got enough of a hillside slope that it's not sitting in water, right? It might be moist, but it's not sitting in water
Okay.
at any given time.
Okay.
So that is something. It is probably the most common thing that I've heard about. People will contact me about, hey, we've got this titanum at our university, like, it's not doing very well. Here's what we're doing. What's wrong? And the most common thing I see is people will say, we take it out of the soil and we put it on a shelf. You don't do that with those species.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah,
it's very common.
That's important to know. So, so I'm hoping we get a big bloom this year from that.
That'd be great.
But right now,
for sure.
Ted is dormant. Tammy or Tabitha, one of them died. One of them, it looked almost like it got pollinated partially, which we don't know how, and then it died. So it was going to that whole bunch of energy. But both of those are dormant. They didn't have remarkable leaves this year, but who knows? So we have multiples that are dormant that could possibly, everyone always wants to know, when's the next bloom? We don't even know when it starts coming out.
Yeah, there's no way.
There's no way.
You just have to wait and let them tell us. And
I had someone the other day who they thought I was lying. And I'm like, we don't even know sometimes if like a foot of growth out of the corm, if it's a inflorescence. I know inflorescence generally is rounder on top and less pokey.
Less pointy.
Yeah, less pointy. But even then, it's hard to tell. I'm like, no, we don't know. You don't understand. We don't know. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's an inexact science in many cases. And, maybe AI will help us out at some point. But there's a lot of times where you just don't know what they're going to do. And I think that's why, again, kind of going back to what we were starting the conversation of the 7-year cycle. I think a lot of people like to think of things as just a very easy cyclical, like you just remember this number, and 7, everybody loves the number 7, of course.
Yeah.
So, I think that's just something that you like, especially, I talk to news reporters when these things are blooming and, NPR and whatnot. And they're like, oh, so it's every 7 years, right? Or it's 8 years and I'm like, no, that's not the case. It tends to be that way.
Yeah.
In fact, the seedlings that were produced from the titanum, I propagated and germinated seeds and whatnot in Des Moines. The ones that went kind of all over the place, specifically up to Como in Minnesota, they did bloom after 6 and 7 years.
Yeah.
So but I also have plants that I had kept in smaller pots and I didn't allow them to grow bigger. They're tiny little plants still. They're 4 feet tall and, years away from being able to bloom. So there's a lot of other factors that go into that. It's not just every 7 years.
I tell people,
but again, I think people want to latch onto an easy number to remember. And that's what they do.
Yeah. I always tell people if it's old enough and happy enough. But that happy is the big variable.
when they're ready, they will.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's also part of the fun. It's a waiting game.
It is.
It adds to the novelty. What I also really love about titanum, I know people feel like, a lot of horticulturists are like, oh, they're so played out. Everybody knows about them, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but there's always a generation of kids specifically who are growing up. They've never smelled them. They've never seen them before. And it's really, really good plant to kind of bridge that gap between, the unknown and the known of the botanical world. Kids know, some of the fruits and plants and things that they eat and they see, in their day-to-day lives. This one's very distinct. It's very different. In Des Moines, for example, when I was there, I had many kids come in and they're like, oh, I would love to grow them. And I would give them, a couple of, the little tiny tubers from cognac.
Yeah.
And say, well, you can't grow this one, but you can definitely grow this one. Take this home and grow it.
Yeah.
And so it's this way of, it's a way to get kids interested, specifically with kids, but also with adults.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think I would ever get tired of seeing a giant bloom. If you've seen one in person, it is
they're awesome. They're so
stunning.
Cool. I mean,
so stunning. Even a small one, it's just stunning. And then, just everything combined. And it's The funny thing is when kids think they're carnivorous because, their video games
Yes.
morph the Amorphophallus
Everybody
and
thinks
the
they're
Venus.
carnivorous,
I
yes.
know. I'm like, no, it
Yep.
just smells bad.
Yep.
But like for our students, we had a student who, was reading us a study, and he's like, oh, I read that if you take a corm and treat it with gibberellic acid, you might get an immature corm to bloom sooner. And we have enough Titan Arums, and we had a corm that was of possibly flowering size. I'm like, you know what? You go for it. So we bought gibberellic acid, and the story I tell, because everyone's like, oh, I want to, see a flower. I'm like, yeah, well, we mutated this one. This one was pretty cool. So
Yeah,
the one I'm
it's a
talking
mutant.
about, where it actually did flower, but it only came out with, I want to say, maybe 30 female flowers, no males. The spathe was beautiful, fully developed. The skirt around it, which is technically modified leaf, it didn't open, but I was sort of more like intrigued by the fact that treating it did that. And I know we're supposed to chop it down, but it looks like some weird Sputnik. Like,
Yeah, it looks very cool.
It looks
Yeah,
pretty
and,
cool.
There are some species, by the way, that are epimictic, right, or however you want to pronounce that. And so they do produce, seeds without being, pollinated.
I don't know. Yeah, it looks pretty firm. I don't know.
I did cut open a couple of
did you?
fruits.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was nothing inside of it. So
okay. Well, good. I'm glad you did, because I was like,
it's a neat experiment anyway, to see what happens, and especially now that there are so many plants out there that you can, especially with the clones, that you can start to kind of play around with them and see what you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't look like it hurt the corm at all, so it's
yeah.
you should
Who
just
knows?
grow a new leaf.
Knows? Yeah.
So.
And then I do want to throw out that the konjac, that one's cultivated for food, right? That one is,
Yes.
if you eat the konjac noodles, I know it was used in because it's so fibrous. I guess on the market there's this, like, it's almost like the water moist stuff that you put in plants to absorb water, and it becomes this gel. It's basically what it does.
And you do need to be careful with it.
Yes.
I've had the candies before. And the candies have already, they're fully swollen, right? So you don't have to worry about the candies, other than it could get lodged in your throat, because it is very gelatinous.
Yeah.
But there are cases where people will eat them, and, they'll eat the powder that is produced from the cognac. And they do have problems, right? Like there have been cases of people dying, specifically in Southeast Asia with the candies. There's kids choking on them. Again, they're very, very gelatinous, and they don't break down very easily. With saliva and, kind of mastication. So it's kind of one of those things where you do have to be careful with them. It's more of a novel sort of thing. I brought, a bunch of candies home from Thailand last time I was there, just because I wanted to share with people, like, this is what they are. The other thing to keep in mind is that they do have little tiny crystals in them, right? Yeah. And so you don't want to bite into a leaf, not that you would necessarily, or into a corm without having prepared it first. In Southeast Asia, with some of the smaller leaf species, they'll actually cook them like asparagus. And I've not eaten them, but I've seen people, collecting them, and they tell us that you just put them on like in stir fry sort of thing. No idea what they taste like. But the other one is the Peonophilius, the elephant yam. Yeah. That's also another one that is, cut up and, produced as food, and cultivated pretty heavily around the world. So there are different ways to eat them and whatnot, but you do need to be careful with not only the crystals inside of them, but for some of the species like cognac, the gelatinous nature of them, which can be tough.
I almost went to the emergency room when I had some. I was like, I said, not only does this make me not want to eat anymore, I want to die, because it was, I'm like, this is awful. So I always like to tell that story because, it's, so what are some species that you want to see in the wild, and what do you have any trips coming up, and is there any plans to go to areas where that there's going to be some habitat destruction? Are you working with anyone and trying to save some of these?
Yeah, right now I'm not. I don't have any trips planned. If I do go, it'll be in October of this year. And I would probably go back to Vietnam if that's the case, just because Vietnam is expanding so much and growing so much. And If you've not been to Vietnam, it's an amazing place, amazing people. It's a really, really awesome place. So I would love to go back to Vietnam. I would really, really, however, like to see the giant species
Yeah.
in the wild. I would
Yeah.
love to see Titanum in the wild.
Yeah.
Decasilva, Huidii, Gigas, especially Gigas. I think Gigas is a very, very cool species. I would love to see those. And again, not even necessarily the inflorescence. I don't really care about the inflorescence as much as I care about the leaf.
Yeah.
Sitting underneath a giant tree-like leaf is a very cool experience. And I would love to do that in the wild, specifically in Sumatra.
You don't have Gigas. Is that one not? Do you have that?
I do not have it anymore. I used to have Gigas, and then I donated it. The vast majority of my plants I've donated to various institutions, and so that they can take them over and take care of them. So I have probably 20 species.
Okay.
I would say at this point, but at one point I had 60, 70 species. Again, they're all similar in terms of what they need under cultivation, but dissimilar enough that they can kind of be difficult to grow. Right? They require a lot of input of energy to repot every year, to keep feeding, to keep humid enough, and all of those things that they need.
And Gigas, you grow similar to Titan Arum, same requirements. Is it?
Yes, but it's also harder to grow. And I don't know why specifically. I also know people that are like, no, I grow it and it's fine.
Yeah, there's always those people.
I'm like, of course you do.
Yeah.
So for me, it was not easy to grow. It never wanted to actually grow, and it may have been an issue with the heat. Not getting enough heat. Again, they're coming from areas that are basically warm year round all the time, right? So Gigas is definitely one that I would love to see in the wild. It's basically a skinnier, taller version in petiole, in leaf anyway, as Titanum. So it would be very, very cool to see in the wild.
Well, when you go, I want to go because that's on my bucket list.
Absolutely. I know quite a few people. From some of the forest stations and whatnot down in Sumatra. In fact, I just met a group of folks that had come up. We had a Amorphophallus conference. What was that, in October? I want to say October, November.
Is that where you spoke at Huntington?
Yeah, down in Huntington, yeah. And so I met some folks there that they had come up and for them, again, it's amazing because for them they step outside and that's the world they live in, right? Like it's just there they are, right?
I know.
Which is amazing. And I'm sure there's people around the world that think the same thing about, certain plants that we have here in parts of the States. But, it's amazing. And it's really nice to make those connections with folks that you can say like, hey, I would love to come down to Sumatra and see some of these plants in the wild. And see them while you can. Again, I can't stress enough that I've been Central South America, Southeast Asia, I all over, North America, Central America, and I've seen burning forest and chopped forests like crazy. Yeah. And, if you want to see it, go now, put it on a credit card, buy your plane ticket and just go because it's not going to be there forever. Specifically in some parts of the developing world, I'm glad that they're growing. I'm glad that they're doing well. I'm glad that their governments are doing well, of course. But there's a cost, an environmental cost that comes with that. And, if you want to see it, you definitely need to go and see it. Again, I've seen way too many burning forests, and chop down forests and things that,
so sad.
Think of the things that we do know that are there, the species that are known and all of the unknown species that are gone before we can, even have a chance to describe them, right? And to grow them and cultivate them and, potentially use, for medicines and whatnot. So
for sure,
it's all out there. You just got to go look for it, and in some of these places around the world, especially in the tropics where the diversity is so high, you can literally walk outside and find new species right in front of you.
Isn't that crazy? That is so crazy.
It's very cool.
So
It's very, very cool.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yes.
I was just going to say, so when I say, Amorphophallus, I should stress that you did talk at the Huntington, which is, so your stuff when it comes to Amorphophallus.
I hesitate to call myself an expert in anything because there's always more to learn.
Well, that's what experts do. Experts never call themselves experts. It's the people who aren't experts who call themselves experts, because once you know something, you know how much more there is to learn about it. So
for sure. Yeah. After you've grown something long enough, it's one of the things that I love about horticulture and botany in general is every season is something different. Every season is a new, again, I just moved back to California after 15 years in the Midwest, and I'm like, okay, what do I do with these whiteflies? I never had whitefly issues.
Oh yeah, you're talking
Midwest,
to me about
whiteflies like crazy.
Yeah,
so, like,
and I'm like, well,
yeah, you're always learning, you're always growing, along with the plants. I would like it to be, I would like to get to a point where it does feel a little bit more relaxed, for sure. Where it's not every season I'm like, stress.
Nope.
Especially with some of these new species that like, I've lost species where we collected in the wild. They were never described and they did not make it through. I grew them for, 4 or 5, 6 years, never got them to bloom. And then one season, I go to pot them up and they're dead.
Yeah.
So like that happens and it's unfortunate, right? Like it's one of those things where, I donated a whole collection of new species, of begonias that, were yet to be described, to the, National Begonia Collection down in Dallas-Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And they did well. They were propagating, and then they apparently moved everything to a new greenhouse, and then a lot of them died. So these things happen, right? And it's just a part of it. And unfortunately, it's very stressful when there's species that are like the one and only, right?
Well, that's that's what I hate. That's when I don't want any plant to be rare, and I definitely don't want to be in charge of the one that's in the US. We've had people who brought us some begonias and they're like, oh, I think this is the only one in the US. I'm like, get it out of my hands. Especially the begonias, because begonias just one day just up and die on you.
Yes,
so
they're very prone.
Yeah. Especially the tropical ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Amorphophallus is the same way where, they're doing great one season and then they go dormant and then you go to pot them up the next season and they're dead.
Well, I mean,
like, what happened?
Or they just don't bloom for you for years. And you're like, what do you want? And it's embarrassing because we were like one of the first to get them to bloom. And now all the a high school bias is getting them, not to say they can't, they obviously they know what they're doing, but I'm like, come on, we were one of the first. What is wrong with ours? What's going on?
I have multiple species, new species of Amorphophallus in my grow tent right now that I've had since 2017 that have never bloomed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, please bloom. I can't get a picture of what you're actually going to be. You can't be described until you bloom.
Yeah.
I need you to bloom, and they won't bloom.
Yeah.
So, and you try everything you can. And
I mean, that is the fun part. I mean, that is, like you said, that is sort of the fun part of it. If it was easy, we would, just everyone would be growing them and we'd be like, meh, meh.
It would be boring. Otherwise,
it'd be boring. Exactly. What is the do you recall the Facebook group?
There's, I want to say it's just called Amorphophallus.
Probably. Okay. And
I do want to mention real quick too, there, Alan Galloway, again, a good friend of mine, who passed a few years ago. But he has a web page that has hybrids, unidentified species, and identified species on it. And it's all plants that he had taken care of. I want to say it's being taken care of. Well, I actually don't know who's running the site anymore. I do see that it is, copyright 2026. Somebody's, updating it. Yeah. It's either Bjorn Hussein or maybe Juniper Level Botanic Garden. I don't really know. But there's hundreds of species on there. So if people are looking for a really good reference, I do caution people with TikTok and Facebook and even the Facebook group, which has a lot of information and whatnot. There's a lot of people who, again, claim to know something and are either novice and they don't really know, which I don't mean to shame people, but, if you don't know, please don't spread misinformation. Yeah. Cutting petioles prematurely, for example, to force dormancy is not something that I would ever say is a best practice. But you see people doing that.
I heard, there was I thought it was a reputable place that was doing that. And I couldn't believe that. I'm like, why would you ever cut green material like that?
I mean, it's just, it's not something that you should want to do.
No. Just
You
let
know,
it die
when we're
completely.
collecting, of course, you have to do that, but
Mhm.
you know, it does,
Mhm.
you know, stymie the growth of
Yeah.
the corm and the plant in general. And you know, you definitely don't want to do it with Titanum and some of those larger species that, you know, they have to be. They need more than a 4-month period to grow,
Yeah.
right? And you'll hear people that say, "Oh, but they come back, you know, the next season they're fine." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you're keeping your plant unhealthy.
Yeah.
You know, you're cutting it from its ability to grow." So
Yeah,
the group is just called Amorphophallus, by the way. I was
Okay.
just looking it up.
Okay.
So the Amorphophallus, and then there's another one that's Amorphophallus hyphen swappin cell. So that's
Okay.
there's two.
And I was
Yeah.
going to ask so there's probably still, I'm assuming you want to buy, it's corms you buy generally, or seed or plants.
Mhm.
You don't have to name some reputable sites, but what should people look out for that? Because I imagine some are still poached, like,
Yes.
and
Oh, there's a lot. Yeah.
and you want to
Um,
avoid that. So I guess you want it to buy it from a reputable site that has, is growing
for
them
sure.
themselves.
Yeah. I stay out of eBay.
Yeah.
eBay has poachers like crazy.
Mhm.
So a lot of those plants are, again, they're prematurely cut. They're yanked out of the soil. They're not taken care of properly. I've been to locations where poachers have been that have literally followed us around and then poached all the plants, thinking that what we were looking at was whatever they took.
Oh.
You know, and they literally just rip plants out of the ground, and they break petioles, they break corms, they do all that kind of stuff. So you don't want to do that, not only because it's poaching and killing an entire population of plants, but also the plants are unlikely in many cases to survive.
Mhm.
So it's just the same as, you know, people that, you know, poach birds from the wild, for example, or tortoises or whatever. Many of them die in the process. So please, please, please stay out of eBay, especially if you're a novice. Not that I don't encourage people to continue to grow their collections and grow their interest in the genus,
Mhm.
or in botany in general. But definitely you want to stay away from, you know, people who are poaching from the wild.
Yeah.
And they're out there, and they're usually pretty easy to see if you know what you're looking for.
Okay.
Plant Delights, again, is a great one. They're very reputable. Great. I know the owner. You know, they're great people.
Okay.
They know what they're talking about.
Okay.
They were in connection with Alan Galloway for quite a while. By the way, his website is Alan Galloway Botanicals.
Okay. Got
So
it.
it's a good website to check out. But yeah, Plant Delights is a good one. The swap and sell typically has, you know, novice growers, or, you know, people who are like, hey, I've got extras of this if
Mhm.
anybody wants to buy some. So you do see poachers on there for sure. But you see less of that, and more people who, especially here in the United States, are like, hey, I've got, you know, 15 albas that I need to get rid of
Yeah.
for this season because there's just too many of them. During the pandemic, the prices went
Of
skyrocketing.
course.
So you see like Onsiculii, which are these tiny, smaller than a pea size corms that were selling for like $100 a piece, which is just outlandish. You know, I've got a pot of Onsiculii, and there's probably, I don't know, 200 plants in there. So, you know, like it's kind of silly, some of the pricing
Yeah.
that you see. But yeah, I would stay toward actual places like, or the conservatory, you know, UC Davis Conservatory.
Mhm.
You've got lots and lots. That's what I've been working on there, right? Is you know, splitting plants up and figuring out what can be sold. Just
Yeah,
making
'cause-
sure that it's stuff that is not poached from the wild is number one. I also say, if you live in an apartment and you've got, you know, your standard 8-foot roof, and you don't have the ability to grow a Titanum, please do not buy a Titanum. You know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, especially as they get older.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of really small species or smaller species that grow really well in the house, up against a window, or under grow lights, and they're much easier to take care of, rather than a Titanum that,
Mhm.
you know, it's just not going to do well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, we'll have some for
it's
sale
up
at
to
our
people, but
our plant sale, April 25th, in person. I'm letting you go
Yeah.
through and decide. And I think we might have a grab bag of ones, because some of the corms, they get mislabeled.
Yeah, and that I should mention too. You know, people get really down on themselves about that happening.
Yeah.
It happens to all of us.
Yeah.
I have so many plants that every year I end up with you know, pots of plants, and I'm like, what happened to the tag?
Yeah,
Where is
where's
it?
the tag?
It's usually squirrels grab it, or it breaks, or
Yeah.
it fades in the sun and I didn't catch it quickly enough or whatever. So it happens all the time, and then you have to wait for them to regrow, and then hopefully you can tell from the petiole, or the leaf in general, or if it blooms. In some cases, you just have to wait for them to bloom until to know what it is again.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, we have people that pull tags out, or like who that knows what happens to them. Like you said,
exactly.
They just Well, that's good. I'm glad it's not just us. But no, I wasn't. Trust me, I'm not feeling bad. I'm like, oh, there's only so much I can do. But this has been. This has been great. We could talk forever. And the funny thing, like, I've run into people who collect, iridescent plants or plants this. You're the first of just obsessed with single-leafed plants.
Yeah.
So that's because there's some cycads that you grow that are like a single-leaf one, and that's a first. I'm like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah. I think it's just, it's amazing, right? They've evolved away all the parts except for the single leaf. The cycad that you're referencing is multipinnata, and it's amazing. It produces this 15 to 20 foot tall leaf, and as the plant gets older, it's just a single leaf at a time. And Huntington has a very large specimen, by the way, for anybody in Southern California who would like to see one in the wild, or not in the wild, but in cultivation, I guess.
Yeah.
They're amazing. They're so cool.
I'm guessing you don't have a lot of.
It's the same thing with the Amorphs.
You probably don't have a lot of knickknacks at your house. You're like, nope, we're getting rid of clutter. Only what we need.
Yeah, it's only what we need.
Only
right?
what we
I'm
need.
all about the minimalism.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Do you want people to do you have a social media you want people to follow you on, or you just no?
I don't have a professional social media that I have anymore. I do have Instagram, but it's more pictures of my kids than anything these days.
Okay.
I don't really use Facebook all that much anymore. But
you gave us some good
if people
sites.
do want to reach out, I'm out there.
Yeah.
So you could definitely Google me.
Yeah. People are like, oh my God, I have to have what he has. So well, this has been great. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah, and
I could talk about Amorphs all day long.
I know. Well, there's so many.
You get me talking about
botany
and horticulture in general, and I'm like, let's yap for days.
There's so many species. Each species we could talk about forever, and we didn't.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I think we covered most of the the important stuff and the the fun parts of your travel. So,
nice little primer.
Yeah. So thank you, Derek, and thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, happy gardening.